What would you do for $14? Hello and welcome to Bump in the Night. We are in Sylva, North Carolina, where I want to talk about senseless violence. Seems like on the news we see stories of acts of violence and crimes that just seem so brutal and so nonsense that we ask ourselves why. Like, why are these things happening? I figured I'd bring you guys to Scotts Creek here in Sylva to talk about one of the more senseless acts of violence and one of the most brutal cases of murder and theft that have ever happened in this small town. Come with me. In the spring of 1947, Sylva had or witnessed one of the most brutal murders and theft that has ever been recorded in this part of the state. A cab company, or actually just a cab service, was owned by Jack and Margie Maple Hall, a husband and wife, who would offer their services to help tourists and locals alike have a ride between the various towns. As you know, in the mountains, towns tend to be separated by mountains and valleys. You can't just walk from one to the other. And there was a train, but you wouldn't take a passenger train to go, 7 miles down the road. Anyway, one night in the spring of 1947, Jack was running his cab and Margie was basically taking care of the business side of it. Jack was doing the driving, Margie was doing the accounting, the numbers, if you will. One night in the spring of 1947, Jack picks up a cab fare for a man named Robert Messer, a local man. And Robert Messer was aware of the services that Jack and his wife were providing, and he was aware of how many fares they might have picked up that day because he was local. Robert ends up getting in the cab with Jack, who on that night, his wife happens to be in the cab with him. She liked to ride with him on late nights, basically, to make sure business was done and also be with her husband on late night drives. When Robert gets into the cab, he asks them to stop and pick up his friend, whose name was Earl O'Dear. The joke writes itself with, "Oh dear, here comes Earl O'Dear." That was stupid. We won't put that in. Anyway, so they pick them up. They take them to a bridge which runs over Scotts Creek here in Sylva, and tell them to pull over and to give them the money, basically, that they had accumulated that day. When Jack and Margie refused, they both pulled out hammers from their pockets and beat them both to death. Robert Messer and Earl O'Dear make off with the money, which ended up accumulating to $14. They tried to get away, and inevitably they were caught. They were sent elsewhere in the state to be executed, and the story ends there, or so they say. This senseless act of violence has left a permanent imprint on this town, and specifically in the area I've been walking around now. I'm actually at the bridge over Scotts Creek. I'm not, looking for ghosts. I know I'm not looking for bloody hammers, but I just want to show you how horrible, monstrous things can happen to anyone and in any setting, even a small town in North Carolina. Let's look around and check out the setting. We're walking across the bridge, which actually leads to Dillsboro Road, right here on the outskirts of downtown Sylva. You can see the courthouse up there. And this bridge runs over Scotts Creek. And here at the end of the bridge, where the train tracks cross, is where Robert Messer and Earl O'Dear left the bodies of Jack and Margie Hall. Seems kind of fitting that a dumpster sits here now. So when the police found the bodies of Jack and Margie, they were actually unrecognizable. Robert and Earl had beaten them so ferociously in the head with the hammer that they were not able to be identified on facial recognition alone. After realizing who the car belonged to, they understood that these were the bodies of Jack and Margie. When Robert and Earl finished their crime, they knew they couldn't just walk around covered in blood with the hammers with which they committed the crime. Before they left, they took the hammers out of their pockets and threw them into Scotts Creek. It's not very deep. There's a lot of stones in there. Basically, any kind of hammer, claw hammer, would get caught and would stay in that position. It wouldn't just run down the creek. So, given the nature of this YouTube channel, there is a ghost story. After this crime was committed and Robert Messer and Earl O'Dear were put to death, people started seeing Robert Messer and Earl O'Dear walking by Scotts Creek. Some people say that they're looking for the evidence which basically condemned them to death. And some people say that it's a curse that was put on them by the devil to have to wander the area in which they committed their horrible crime. Is the ghost story true? I don't know. I've never seen anything look out of place on this bridge or near this water. But the story which inspired the ghost story is very true. You can Google yourself. Don't Google yourself. You can Google the names of the parties involved. I'll put their names down here and in the links below if you're interested in finding out more about this story. The local newspaper here was still around back then and kept up with the story in pretty good detail. So I encourage you to check it out. Now, I know this wasn't a traditional bump in the night kind of episode. We're not talking about ghosts, we're not talking about cryptozoological beings, but what we are talking about is something that is truly terrifying and something that has the possibility of affecting all of us. And that is senseless crime. That is senseless acts of violence. I encourage all of you to stay safe, to lift each other up instead of bringing each other down, and try to do our individual part of making this world a better place. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.